Hi again, everyone. Thank you very much for joining today. My name is Perica and I'm a co-founder of 57 Hours platform that connects clients with the best guided outdoor adventures across the globe. And today I'm proud to announce our next Epic Adventure webinar that is presented by Alpinist magazine. And the topic is climbing the iconic Eiger North Face with IFMGA guide and our well-known host from the Chamonix webinar, Jeff Witt. 57 Hours is super happy to be partnering with Alpinist magazine, one of the leaders in the climbing publication world. They helped us bring more and more people here. We are super happy to have Jeff Witt back. He's one of the climbing badasses, if I can even say that. He climbed a lot of good stuff from the Everest, Eiger, Chamonix, Grand Teton, you name it, he's been there. And he'll go with us to his story of climbing the iconic Eiger North Face to the Heckmaier Route that was first climbed in 1938. But Jeff will tell you a lot more about that. Before I give the word to Jeff, two details for all of you. First, Alpinist magazine is doing a giveaway with 57 Hours. We will be giving a 1 year subscription to their publication, and we'll also giving we'll be giving one T-shirt. So the lucky winner of this Alpinist magazine package will get this in the next few days. To enter the giveaway, just drop your email in the chat of this webinar. Maya from our team will collect all the emails and we'll go through the raffle, and you'll get an email tomorrow if you're the lucky winner. Next, we have about 40 to 45 minutes of Jeff's presentation, followed by a Q&A. And Q&A might get beyond the hour, because we'll answer all of the questions you might have. To enter the Q&A, you have the link to the Google form you got in the email, and you also can leave the question in the chat. Again, Maya from our team will collect the questions and we'll go through them after the presentation. Jeff, the stage is yours. Introduce yourself and show us the amazing world of Eiger North Face.
Excellent. Thank you, Perica. Just going to go over and share my screen. How's this looking, Perica? Is that correct?
This looks great, Jeff.
Okay, you don't see the chat box, do you?
No, it's all good.
Sweet. Cool. Well, everyone, thank you very much, first of all, for coming and joining our presentation this evening. My name is Jeff Witt. Actually, I didn't mean to jump ahead, but that's a little bit about me. My name is Jeff Witt. I'm a climber, mountain guide. I like to think of myself as a jack of all trades and a master of none. Do everything pretty darn well. Definitely not the best at anything I do. And I think that naturally makes me an alpinist, which is why we're talking about this today. So I love this photo of the Eiger. I think it's worth a moment just to say thank you to Alpinist magazine for presenting the show tonight. It's an honor to be presenting this for them, or with them, for 57 Hours. And I've actually known the folks that founded Alpinist magazine. It's a really cool publication, and it's definitely worth picking up sometime and reading about it. Pretty sure they have a back issue that talks about the Eiger and talks about this very route. So anyway, thanks Alpinist. Thank you 57 Hours for making this possible. And off we go. So a little bit about me. I'm hailing from Chamonix, sitting in my little cabin below the glacier, the Mont Blanc Massif. And tonight we are talking about, or I should say today, it's evening here, but today we're going to talk about the Eiger North Face and my own experience climbing it, and then talk a little bit about what it's like to climb it, something about the history. Yeah, you can see, I'm not going to address the bullet points directly, but you know, I think one of the things that I came away with after the climb was, you know, what defines the Eiger North Face these days? You know, historically it was the Great North Wall, and then it became the Great Death Wall, the Mordvand. And now is it like, you know, is it such a trade route that it's kind of like boring by modern standards, hence the board wand, or is it just one of those alpine classics? And so maybe that's something we can talk about in the Q&A afterwards. So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about history, a little bit about the route. You get it. So let's get on with the show. So first of all, the Eiger North Face, and I'm sure many of the people watching the presentation this evening have an idea of, you know, what the Eiger North Face stands for. You know, it was one of the great last great north walls in the Alps to be climbed. It was considered kind of the last great challenge of the Alps, and, you know, in its era, kind of the end of the golden age of climbing in the Alps. The face is 1,800 meters tall. That's 5,800 feet. It's 2 El Capitans stacked on each other, although not quite as steep. And what's amazing is you see these guys. This is Andrel Heckmaier on the right and Ludwig Vogt on the left, who are one of the 2 teams that combined to complete the first ascent of the North Face. This isn't on the North Face, but you can see, you know, this is a picture of those guys probably climbing some other feature in their neighborhood. And you can see what they're climbing with. I mean, really simple gear. They don't even have harnesses. They're using the rope to tie themselves in, you know, archaic stuff. And I think it's really cool to remember that as we flip through these photos. The history of the North Face includes somewhere around 65 people dying in the face, not necessarily on the one route, but the first 2 teams that even tried to climb the face didn't come back. Hence its reputation as the Mordvand, the murder wall. And this is a picture of Tony Kurtz trying to, he and his partner joined up with another team of 2 on their attempt, and they got caught in a storm. Actually, one of the guys got hit by a rockfall, and they tried to retreat from the face. And basically one guy got swept off by an avalanche, one guy got hit by a rock and knocked off, and Tony was like the last man standing and was trying to like rappel down his rope, and he didn't have enough to touch down. And the rescuers were actually able to get him up a rope, and with his frostbitten hands, he tried to tie his 2 ends together, and then exclaimed the words, "I'm finished," and slumped back on the rope, and that was his story. So interesting history. Here's a look at the Hinterstoicer, and you can see now that you know, this photo is probably, judging by that helmet, I'm guessing this is like the 70s or the early 80s. You know, since then the pitch has been fixed, and it's really interesting. Keep this photo in mind as I get to the picture of the Hinterstoicer while we were on it, because you can see it was quite different. And that's one thing that has changed over the years, is that the ideal conditions for climbing the face have changed. The modern desire is to have it more in winter conditions, as you can see here with Uli going for the speed record, which is also part of the history of the North Face. So Uli, before he passed, made the current speed record on the Eiger in 2 hours and 22 minutes, which is absolutely ridiculous. I don't even think we're going to ramp that fast. Yeah, so you see the conditions where Uli has it, and I'm just going to flip back, and you can see these conditions, and quite a bit different. So you can also see how a little bit of snow might help the mountain be more climbable, especially in the modern era where it gets so dry that rockfall is a big issue. So the snow acts a little bit like a glue and kind of locks the face into place. All right. So with that in mind, let's go on and look at the mountain in person and see what it's like in this thing. So the story's kind of interesting. It starts with my climbing buddy Matthias Richter, up from, he lives in Dresden, home of the Elbsandstein. And basically, that's where things started. He looks a little crazy in this photo. That's just because he is. But Matt, when I came out to visit and go rock climbing, suggested that I bring some alpine climbing gear with me. I was going in October. And I'm like, alpine gear? What in the world would I bring alpine gear to the Alps for? And he's like, well, you never know. Maybe the Eiger will be in condition. And I kind of laughed. I was like, oh yeah? When was the last time either one of us set foot in the alpine realm? You know, I'd been guiding in the Tetons all summer in approach shoes. And he works as a doctor. So his experience is like, you know, in the alpine, it's like probably getting an IV in place or something. I don't know. But I still brought the stuff. And amazingly enough, when I arrived, there was, the Alps had been experiencing a long high pressure system. And actually there'd been a fair bit of snow just before that. And so we were kind of wondering, well, are the conditions going to be good enough? The weather's clearly good enough. And we decided to just go. And so part of our plan includes driving down to Grindelwald. I think we started from Dresden at 4 o'clock in the morning. Showed up in the afternoon with just enough time to buy a couple of gas canisters, some food from the store, and hop on the train and ride up to Kleine Scheidegg. And that's kind of how things kicked off. And while we were on the train, we got this view of the North Face. And I got to admit, when we first set eyes on it, we were like, uh-oh, because it looks awfully snowy. We were not expecting it to be so wintry looking. Yeah, so this was what we were looking at as we're riding up the train with all our gear packed. And of course we could turn around, but that's what we came for. And you can see we're probably scratching our heads a little bit, but at this point, nothing to do but walk over there and find out. In fact, I'm going to show the next slide. That's our walking over there. So yeah, with that in mind, I'll skip back. I'd like to just show you. Yes, Perita?
No, continue, Jeff, continue. It's great to see the overview of the route before we go into the climbing it.
Yeah, so here's an overview of the route. I borrowed this from someone online. Hopefully they don't mind me using it for the show. But basically this is a great, you know, probably one of the better just brief descriptions of how the route goes. So keep in mind, hopefully you can see my cursor here, that from bottom to top, we're talking about almost 2,000 meters. It's 1,800 meters, just under 6,000 feet. Obviously, if you look at the snow at the bottom part, it's fairly low angle, but then things are getting pretty steep in here. And you can see that the face is kind of concave and gets quite steep at the top. So that's what you're looking at. And then there's a couple of features. The first pillar here, which you kind of climb past as you go up. The shattered pillar, we actually climbed right up the edge of that while we climbed the route. And then we ended up coming up here this way and on. And what I'd like to do is go over each day kind of as we go. So as you can see by the bullet points, we didn't really know how much time this was going to take us. But it was mid-October, so the days aren't that long. Obviously winter conditions, you guys saw that image. And you know, admittedly, like what kind of on-site strategy would we want to apply to this? And basically we started talking about it in the car while we were driving out, and I was like, man, I can't imagine like sleeping in Kleine Scheidegg, not sleeping that night, getting up at 3 in the morning, finding our way to the base of the wall in the dark, trying to find the start of the route and get up it until first light, you know, potentially getting lost and bring time, and it creates a little bit of anxiety. And so one idea that I had while we were driving was like, well, what if we just start in the afternoon when we get there and just find get up like the first part of the route, find our way on the face, spend the night, go from there. And Matt was on board. So that's kind of how it worked out. So our day one is actually like 2 hours in the afternoon, climbing up past the first pillar, the shattered pillar, and then trying to find a bivouac somewhere. And
Jeff, this is a bit unusual strategy for climbing the Eiger. From what I know, like people usually do this, what you said, wake up at 2 and then have a mammoth day one.
Totally. And in fact, I mean, it's kind of funny. Like I said, I just thought about it in the car, and Matt usually is on board. You know, he's German, so he's pretty happy not to spend the extra $100 at the hostel. And of course, you know, you're paying for bed and breakfast, and you don't get the breakfast because you're leaving so early. It's funny, like, I think for me, it was just a way to maybe tackle the anxiety of getting on was one of the bigger routes that we've done together. So yeah, kind of a different strategy, and let's see how it plays out. So the one cool thing is here we are in the afternoon walking up to the base of the face. No problem finding the route. Not exactly, at least, but here you can see I'm putting my helmet on for the obvious reasons. You can see all the rocks laying around. But what you can probably also see from this image, a good takeaway is like the really nice weather. It's clear. It's actually just above freezing at this, at this elevation. In fact, I think right here you can even see that there's a little bit of ice. So it's just hanging around freezing. And here we are starting up the face. Everything's in our packs. We haven't put the rope on yet because it's some pretty easy scrambling. And I think it's fair to say, like, if you're not comfortable scrambling up this terrain, it's probably not the face for you, because this is the place where you really want to make up some time and just kind of get the ground under your belt and behind you. First difficulties that we found were right beside the shattered pillar here. So we threw the rope on, started going up some rocks here. And this image I really like because it gives you a taste for the rock. So take a look at the rock and you kind of notice it's sedimentary it's limestone, which is a sedimentary rock. This particular rock, it's not as beautifully compact as it is in the Verdon Gorge. It's quite broken from the freezing and the thawing. And actually it's challenging to protect. It's hard to get gear into. So that's another kind of aspect of this climb to keep in mind, is the compact nature of the rock and the fact that it is a little tricky to climb on. Kind of another cool aspect is, you end up using a lot of in situ or in place anchors. And this one's my favorite because it's like new meets old. You got a beautiful brand new black diamond quick draw attached to this really old rope.
I have to say, Jeff, it looks like the anchor from the first ascent, maybe.
Yeah, it totally could be. I mean, it's a Perlon rope. It's got a sheath on it, but yeah, that's some. And what's cool is, like, I had no issue clipping that and continuing on. First of all, the climbing probably wasn't that hard there, but at the other side, it's like it's all locked into place with ice anyway, right? So it's kind of funny. I smiled when we went by that one. I didn't smile at all the anchors though. So now we've been climbing for probably an hour and a half. As you can see, the sun's starting to shine on the face. We're in the snow now, so we put our crampons on. And that's probably one thing we didn't anticipate, is the fact that we'd be putting our crampons on so early on the route and actually wouldn't take them off again until we were back down to the valley. So it was a pretty interesting experience in that regard. It was hands down the most time I've ever spent in crampons without taking them off before. Not including taking them off at night, of course, but yeah. And I have to say the ambiance in the face is pretty cool, and we were getting a taste of it already as the sun sets here. And, 2 hours into our climb, we're like, well, let's find a place to spend the night. And I'll pull my cursor out here. And if you look at these ledges, you don't really see any good ledges to lay down on, do you? Everything that's flat's covered with snow at an angle that you'd almost have to have a shovel to chip out a space on. And I was starting to get a little nervous, and then suddenly we stumbled into this little cave, which was like this perfect flat floor with an overhang above it, and then it even had these icicles in the back that lined across the back of the cave. And I couldn't believe it. We arrived there and I was like, oh my God, like, this is a gift. I hadn't seen this on any of the topos. And yet there we were, very convenient with the icicles because we needed to melt some water that night. And ice makes better water. Makes a higher quantity of water than snow, so you don't have to work as hard. Anyway, needless to say, we were really stoked. And I actually later went back and found it on another topo, and they called it the, quote, wet cave bivouac. And of course, in our case, it was all frozen, so it was like the perfect cave bivouac with icicles for melting for water. That's what I would call it. Anyway, our first night. So here we're settling in, and that was our first day on the wall. It doesn't really count. I would call it more of an approach. But with this, the advantage of this idea of starting the evening before was that if you watch my cursor, if we didn't spend the night here, then we would have been looking at going to the death bivouac here and on the first day, which surely we could cover that in a day, but I doubt we would have made the Traverse of the Gods bivouac, which is the next one here. So basically, I mean, there's a bivvy there at the Traverse of the Gods. There's one at the Brittle Cracks here. We have another at the Death Bivouac. The Swallow's Nest is here, but it's not that good. We passed it, and it would have been hard pressed to do anything but sit on our packs. And then we're here in this little cave. So actually, kind of a limitation on places to stay, which was part of our strategy. If we could get up this first little bit to here, then the next day getting to there, we could definitely do it. And say if we got there by noon, we could finish off the face. But our goal for the next day was kind of the meat of the face, and that was the climb to the Traverse of the Gods, and then finish off the last bit the next day, and which would also give us time to do the descent, so we wouldn't have to spend the night on top. Which is actually a strategy of some of the folks, is that they would like climb all the way to the summit and then bivvy there, and there's actually a platform hacked out on the summit ridge. Maybe not the most comfortable place to sleep. Although I do know, I think we might have some folks that have joined in. I don't know if they're here or not, but Jeff and Pretty Wright just finished climbing the 6 north faces of the Alps in a season. So big congratulations to them. They might actually be the only couple that have done it in like 1 year. It's pretty awesome. But I think they spent the night on top. So maybe during Q&A, they could pipe in and tell us about it if they're participating this evening. Anyway, I'm going to jump on to the next day. You guys surely have read about these all little spots, you know, pretty famous places on the face. And if you don't know that much about the face, I highly suggest picking up a copy of Heinrich Harr's book, The White Spider, and learn about it, because it's really a kind of a neat face with a lot of history. Every one of those places has a name for a reason. And yeah, I'll throw a couple more bits in as we go. So day 2, yes, Perita.
Yeah, I said nice, Jeff. Great. Let's continue.
Yeah, so day 2, we get up out of the little frozen cave bivvy, and basically have one pitch to warm up on before we hit the difficult crack, which is the first crux pitch of the route. They call it the difficult crack because it's difficult. It's a steep 5/8, kind of a, I mean, this, you really see most of it right there. Got some crack, it's a little bit of a corner, some broken rock, and you can see we got the crampons on, and I did pull my gloves off, jammed them into my jacket, and tackling this on. And I have to say it was a lovely pitch. It protected pretty well, climbed really nicely in crampons. I was really psyched to get this one done and kind of see that, yeah, we belong here. Like, this isn't over our heads. We know what we're doing. And what's cool about this photo is you can see all the crampon marks from the previous travelers. So if you're ever trying to find a route in the Alps, an alpine route in the Alps, look for the crampon scratches. That'll help you find your way. Ule dry tools up this thing, and if you watch his videos, there's one where it's like tool slips, and you're like thinking he's just gonna fall off the face, but he just keeps motoring on. It is so crazy. So after the difficult crack, that brings you up to under the big red wall on the upper right side of the Eiger, which is called the Rote Flue. And so it's kind of a landmark. You kind of climb up underneath that until you can't go any further, and then you hang a left and traverse over, and you should be at the Hinterstoicer. So that's what we're doing here. And as you can see, like, you can even see that there's some ice under the snow. The snow is pretty compact, really fine conditions. And actually, perhaps this image does it even more justice to demonstrate just how good the conditions were on the face. At this point, we were so stoked. We were swinging our tools in perfect neve, frozen snow, you know, to the point where they're like squeaking when you pull them out. So once you get your ice tools in there, there's no way you're going to come out of them, which is nice because you can't really protect this kind of terrain. You could drive a picket into it, I suppose, but you can't get an ice screw because there's not enough ice, and the snow is not dense enough to really protect. So we're pretty happy that it's in the condition it's in. The other thing we're really happy about is the weather is phenomenal. This layer of clouds and the valley floor is pretty idyllic, scenic, if you will, and perfectly clear skies.
Can you tell us, Jeff, how important are conditions in like planning for the Eiger ascent?
I would say they're ultimately important. You know, like you don't want to. It doesn't get climbed in summer anymore because of the rock fall. There's just nothing to hold it in place, and then on the other side, it's I don't know. Really, you just need some snow to hold it in place. You want it to be good frozen snow as opposed to soft snow, like fresh snow. Obviously, that would make for hard work and trail breaking, and you wouldn't be able to see the holds anymore. So I guess maybe a great way to answer that question would be to just describe what led up to our climb, which was that the Alps had 2 meters of snow in the end of September. And then they had 2 weeks of high pressure, like clear, kind of just autumn weather. You know, and what that meant at 3,000 to 4,000 meters is that, you know, a little bit of freezing and thawing, but not that much. And all that snow just condensed into perfect neve, firm snow. So it wasn't so cold that it stayed powdery, but it wasn't so warm that it melted off. And we just happened to show up and, like, I guess, get lucky and got up there. And I mean, once we were on the face, we just realized that, you know, we probably had like conditions that come around once every 5 or 10 years. I'm pretty happy about that.
Perfect.
Yeah, so the interstoice here, you can see some fixed lines, but also leading across. You know, it's kind of optional if you want to grab the line or not. I think we probably, both of us, pulled on the rope in a couple spots and definitely like clipped the gear as along the way. But it was actually, you know, for the pitch with so much reputation, not too bad because it's fixed. It kind of, it almost, my tongue turns it into a little bit of a via ferrata. But yeah, we scooted around the corner, and right around the corner after the Hinterstoicer is where the swallow's nest is. And I don't have a photo of that, but it's a little pedestal, probably the size of a coffee table, where one of the first teams, I think the Sedlmayr brothers, spent the night. And I couldn't even imagine staying there in the conditions we saw it in. It's like hardly a place to sit. So we just kept rolling around the corner, and lo and behold, the ice hose. Kind of a notorious ice pitch, which actually, if you look at it, if you're an ice climber, you look at that and it looks pretty easy. I hope you're nodding your head. Should be. Looks pretty easy. But remember, when they did this in the 30s, when the first ascents were coming, they didn't even have front points on their crampons. And all they carried was like a big, you know, mountaineering axe, traditional with a little straight nose on it and an adze. And for those guys, this must have been terrifying, especially if you imagine it not being snow, but ice, like you would find in the summer conditions back in the day. And so, you know, quite a feat actually for back in the day, and in modern times with good boots, and, you know, I'm running with like monopoint crampons and ice tools. Yeah, piece of cake. I think I put a few screws in this and we sound climbed it. But, you know, something to keep in mind. And if you go back to Hara's book, he's got some pictures of that ice hose, and it looks terrible. It looks quite difficult. So after the ice hose, we pull onto the second ice field. Pardon the typo. And also at this point hit kind of a stairway. You know, it's kind of incredible. You can see all the tracks in it. And it was like, oh my goodness, this has been. Actually, it's been getting climbed, and in fact, we'd actually seen another party that caught up with us just as we left our bivouac. They started in the morning using the other plan. I think their intent was to try to do it in a day, and so we saw 1 or 2 parties on the route as well. Although it really felt like we had it to ourselves at this point. Yeah, I'll let the photo speak for itself. Beautiful ambiance. Wow. Perfect conditions. The Wetterhorn in the back here, I actually still need to go climb this mountain. It's a real pretty one. Spindrift avalanche, that's not water, that's snow. And you can just kind of get a taste of the ambiance of the place. So we're kind of cruising up. We're moving together on the rope, not really getting much protection. One could ask why so much rope or why use it at all, but if anything, it just helps you transition into the next pitch. So basically, in fact, which reminds me, here you can see the British pair that passed us in the morning, and they're going up right through this little mix section. And then So you can see we're going to traverse across, go through this mixed bit. Right here is the death bivouac, and then you have the ramp. And at the end of this day, we'll get back to the face and I'll kind of re-describe the route to you so you can see where we've been and where we're going. Yeah.
Cool. And Jeff, can you tell us, like, do you use any protection when you simul climb? And is that actually something you do a lot in the Eiger?
Moving together, so simul climbing, simultaneously climbing is what it really means, or moving together, or also known as a running belay. So, you know, it's only a running belay if if one person catches the other person. But in this photo, I can pretty much promise you that there's no gear in between us because we're just on snow, and we didn't bring pickets. If we brought pickets, we could hammer them into the snow and clip the rope off to it. But honestly, they're quite heavy, and it would be quite time consuming to beat one in and then, 40 meters later, pull it out. And then you'd have to carry enough where you actually made some progress, or else you'd have to switch the end of the rope. So we're not doing that here. We're actually pretty comfortable just moving up, the tracks and getting, there's good snow. We're getting good purchase, so we don't feel like we're threatened now. But as we get up into the ramp, which is this section up here, we actually move together for a little bit, and we're on rock and it's quite a bit more exposed. And so we're trying to get some gear in between us, clip off some pitons, whatever. And the whole idea is that in case someone slips off, that there is something between us that can catch us with a rope. In my best practices book, I would say if you're moving together on the rope, should have 3 pieces of gear in between you. You can actually see the ropes probably connecting to something right there on this photo. But yeah, not too much on this easier terrain. But as the terrain gets harder, if you're going to move together, yeah, you should definitely have some gear between you. Or else what's the point of having the rope? You might as well just take it off. Yeah. So after the ice fields, we arrived at the Death Bivouac, actually a pretty decent spot. And you could probably sleep here. There's probably just enough room for 2 people to lay down next to each other. For us, it was like a perfect lunch spot. So we sat down and took in lunch. And for those of you that aren't aware of how it got its name, I'll throw that in. It was actually named for the Heckmaier brothers trip, which was one of the first serious attempts on the face, and the high water point, if you will, up at that time. I think it was in 1935 that they were up there, as I recall. But anyway, they got caught up in a storm, and I think they were even up on the ramp, and they had somehow retreated and just bivvied at the Death Bivouac, or on this platform right here, waiting for the storm to ease. And it actually didn't ease for days. And once it cleared, I think they were able to determine with telescopes that they were just still there and not coming down. And it turned out that they had just died, stuck there in a storm for 3 days without enough supplies or enough ways to keep warm. So that's how the Death Bivvy got its name. Kind of ominous. So when you're sitting there, you're thinking about this, and taking in this incredible view of, down here is Kleine Scheidegg. That's where we started our climb from. There's a railway that comes up from Grindelwald and it goes down to Wengen on the other side. This is the Bernese Oberland, by the way. It's Interlaken's right over here, the lakes. But anyway, yeah, it's pretty interesting to sit there and think about that. And you're like, well, maybe it's time to keep moving. So here we are scooting along on the first part of the ramp. And the ramp is basically a feature that that kind of cuts diagonally up and left out from the face. And one of the things is you have this tremendous vertical wall that's above the ice fields that we just climbed up. And there's really no kind of moderate terrain around it, except for right here. There's this kind of leaning ramp, so it's not vertical anymore, even though the face itself is vertical. So you can see this is vertical and this is near vertical, but because the ramp's diagonally to the left, it makes it a little bit easier. And then the trick is from there, do you exit the face, or, and the intent was to climb the face when the guys put the route up. So they found a way to traverse back into the center, into this hanging ice field called the White Spider. And so that's kind of what's connecting us, getting us around these major difficulties. So moving together, and as as you pointed out, Perry said, we're putting in a few pieces, trying to keep some gear between us as we go up, and passing some more beautiful Eiger anchors here, and classic soft iron piton, and surely that's what's connected to all this. I'm just going to go on record and say that I didn't build this anchor, that my buddy did, and not really to my standards, but it worked. Showed up. I'm sure I just actually we were doing blocks, so I think I popped up, and then he took off on the next pitch. So Matt's block was kind of the upper part of the pitches of the day, and in fact here he takes off on what I would call the crux of the route, or at least the ramp, and was actually some pretty tricky dry tooling. Like the rock wasn't that good, there wasn't that much to hold on to, so at this point we're dry tooling, you know, using our crampons, and I followed up this pitch, and actually had a tool pop, and was like hanging from one arm, and then finally I like got reattached and down climbed actually back to a ledge and kind of shook out and finished it, only to arrive at the anchor to find Matt looking like this, with a black eye. Clearly he'd popped a tool. So it was kind of cool, kind of funny anecdote. But I showed up, and the first thing he says is, "Hey man, take a picture." And so I'm like, all right, well, smile. And I take this picture, and then he's like, "Show it to me." And Matt's a doctor. He's a pediatrician, actually. So, you know, he's a professionally trained doctor, and he looks at it and he makes this comment, "Well, if I was a mother, I would just send you home." And my first thought was, shit, it's bad. Pardon my language for the young ones. I'm like, oh no, it's bad. We're going to have to bail now. And I'm just thinking about like trying to get back down the route, or are we going to have to call a helicopter? And I'm like, what do you mean we should go down? And he's like, no, like I would just send her home. Like, it's no big deal. Everything's fine. And then I got it. I was like, cool. Well, it's your block, man. Get back up there. It's kind of funny. So fun little anecdote, and henceforth forever known as the Eiger Eye in his family. So if you ever get a black eye, call it the Eiger Eye. And before I switch slides, I also want to point out the beautiful, we call it, this is known as the American Death Triangle. So anytime you like connect two pieces with, you know, just a circular incorporation of the cord, it actually exaggerates the force on each piece, so it weakens the anchor rather than strengthening it. And
funny thing to me, Jeff, is that you told me you only seen this anchor in Europe, and it's called American Death Triangle.
That is absolutely.
That seems a bit.
Be funny. I only run into these in Europe. And I think these days, like, people know about it enough where it doesn't happen, but ideally the cord should be connected individually to all three pieces and come down in a series of V's and be tied off. Nice of Matt to kind of like at least equalize it with the pin in the middle. But yeah, once again, not the anchor I would use. But anyway, onwards with the next pitch. And so actually Matt got back on the sharp end and finished off this last pitch up the ramp. This is actually called the amphitheater. The ramp opens up, becomes a kind of an icy feature. Again, wonderful alpine climbing. And I'm hoping that everyone is getting a sense for that, you know, like actually really amazing conditions. And, you know, as opposed to how the Eiger was climbed back in the day, which was more of like a rock climb and, you know, the snow fields and the ice fields in summer. Now, actually with you know, modern tools and crampons and boots and clothing, it actually makes more sense to do this in kind of mixed conditions. And the face really climbs well in this style. So at the top of the amphitheater, there's a couple little ledges called the brittle ledges, and they're just big enough to sit on. We actually sat there, had a snack, and I remember thinking to myself, it's actually listed as one of the potential bivouacs in the face. And I was like, oh man, there is no way I would spend the night here. And had one more pitch to go to get to the Traverse of the Gods, which theoretically there is another bivouac spot there. So we were like, well, this one isn't very pleasant. Let's move on. So Matt led off and climbed the brittle crack. I got to give him some credit. He did a lot of the hard pitches on this day. I guess I got things started off and led kind of the first half of the day, and then he took over and did the second half. And despite the Eiger Eye, finished off in good style. And here I am following that pitch. And it's kind of a fun photo. Not necessarily because it's me, but just the ambiance of the clouds below. And I mean, those clouds are now like probably 4,000 feet below us. It's pretty wild. And then we arrived at the bivy ledge on the Traverse of the Gods, which often gets called as the Gods Ledge in short, the Traverse of the Gods Ledge. So we showed up here, like, I think it's about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and we are so stoked. Like, beautiful day, the sun just popped around the face and is beaming on us now, and we're done. Like, there's nowhere to go. Like, we could push on, but we must have at least 4 hours of climbing before the top. So no reason to go on into the dark. And plus we have this amazing ledge to sit on, and time to brew up, get some tea, get some dinner, and just kind of soak in the moment. And as I recall, like, we just sat here for like a half an hour and just like stared off into space. You know, for those of you that aren't familiar with the topography of the Alps, the Eiger is like one of the last big peaks on the northern part of Switzerland, or the center part of Switzerland. Further north of that, there's really not much left. And so we're on the North Face, we're looking north, and all we see is this like layer of clouds and the expanse of Northern Europe in front of us. It was pretty breathtaking. Yeah. So anyway, just a look around from our little spot here, you can see the steps here leading off. The Traverse of the Gods is passing through a cliff band over here, which leads us into the White Spider. And yeah, so we're brewing up, watching the sunset, enjoying the evening. And I'll just go on record and say, like, definitely the most spectacular bivvy I've ever had in my life. Like, amazing position, iconic place. You know, like, we've read stories about people that have shivered there, eating sugar cubes. You know, so cool to finally arrive there yourself and just like soak it in.
Nice.
A couple of details. This basically is what the bivy ledge looks like. It was about 2.5 feet wide and about, oh, I don't know, 11 feet long. I know it wasn't 12 feet because I had my feet in Matt's ear for the night. It wasn't quite long enough for us to stagger, and we're both about 6 feet tall. And as I recall, I even used the pot as a pillow that night to have just enough space. We're clipped in. You can see this tether here. So I'm tethered into the anchor. I tend to pull my harness off at night because I don't like to sleep in it, but you know, you might sleep in your harnesses or at least wrap a sling around your waist or something. But yeah, that's it. Night 2.
Nice.
And yeah, I'll go back to this photo. I didn't really do a good rundown before we started. So just to show you where we are, we're right here on the Traverse of the Gods ledge. And so what we succeeded to do is the first afternoon, climb up to kind of right here, this spot, to that cave. And then that last day that we just went through was up to Difficult Crack, across the Hinterstoiser, first ice field, ice hose to connect to the second ice field, traversing across, doing this little mixed band, which I forget the name of, and then finally getting up to the Death Bivouac for lunch. And then finally, like, all we had to do basically was climb the ramp and traverse out. But that took the second part of the day. You know, that probably took us, I guess, about 4 hours. So we're here, and then we have, you know, basically one more day is what we were planning on. And we need to traverse across the Traverse of the Gods there, and then pop up through the White Spider, which is this, and then figure out which one of the ramps to exit on, and then finally get over to the exit cracks and onto this upper ice field, the summit snowfield actually, and then that would get us to the top. So that's our next day, and I gotta say at this point we were pretty relaxed. We were pretty stoked, really just enjoying the climbing and enjoying the space that we're kind of like living in at this moment. So,
I guess the 3-day strategy paid off in giving you a bit more like maybe longer but more relaxed climb.
Absolutely. And you know, like Matt and I are both married, you know, kind of committed to, you know, life, and we had an agreement going into this, and that was that we were gonna climb as safely as we could, that we were gonna stop and belay pitches anytime we felt uncomfortable, and that we were gonna try and get as much gear as we could. And as a result of that, we knew we weren't going to climb the fastest, because usually to move faster in any kind of technical terrain is to, like, let's just say, remove some safeties. So not place as much gear, not belay as many pitches, maybe climb some sections without the rope. And so that's how you can move faster, is like by moving together and eliminating the security. And we kind of committed to using, applying as much security as we could and playing it safe. And so it kind of created that a little bit more relaxed atmosphere for us. We knew we had good weather. The forecast was standing strong for at least 2 more days. And the other byproduct of this is actually we stopped and took photos, which is why we're all here tonight. So, because I have some photos to share. If we would have done this in 20 hours, I'd probably have 3 photographs and there'd be no story. So it's cool to be able to.
I'm really glad you did that.
Yeah. In hindsight, I am too. And, like,
cool.
It was just a byproduct of the style, And so,
cool.
Different style. It's not Uli Steck doing it in 2.5 hours, but on the other side, we really had the opportunity to soak this place into our soul, I love this photo. So here I am traversing across the Traverse of the Gods, and I did 2 things. I pulled a stone out, and it's hard to imagine you're like 4,000 feet up this face, and the stone just like lifts out of the mountain. It's not the best quality. So I stuck a rock in my pocket just for memory's sake. And then looking down, I'm going to bring the cursor over, and you can see our tracks. So coming up, here's the first ice field and the second ice field. And you can see our tracks here from the day before. And you could pretty much just spit and hit those. It was so steep down this section of the wall. Pretty amazing. And it was really cool to see that. I had to snap a photo. And it really kind of creates some perspective on the expanse of this face. So we would have started up over here and then come up through here. Actually, that's probably the Route de Fleu. I'm actually a little confused, but I'm pretty sure we came up around and then popped across through here. Yeah, hard to say. I think we wiggled around this corner and then kind of came up this way, but huge face. So I'm sorry to say I didn't get a picture of the spider itself. We actually simul-climbed what would be about 6 pitches of ice. I think we might have done it in 1 or 2 pitches with the 5 ice screws that we had. We didn't take any pictures. It's actually kind of strenuous climbing. It was pretty hard ice, and like, you got the pumped calves because it's not quite vertical, and it's, you kind of, it's that one angle of ice that's a little bit of work. So we just kept moving, got it done. And then here we are, there's a little ramp. There's actually a couple different ramps that leave the top of the ice face that they call the spider. And you got to get the right one, because if you don't, it dead ends. Thankfully, you can see there's a few tracks in here. So at this point, we're kind of following the tracks thinking, well, I hope these guys went the right way. So I've got a couple ice screws, at least 1 ice screw in there. That's me leading up. I think it's my turn to do, it's my block, the first part of the day. So Matt had done a pretty substantial block the previous day, so this was my turn. So I led up through the spider, taking on this ramp, and then finally you can see that there's some business up above me. So let's see what the story is. Actually, there's a really nice ice run over there. Maybe I should have gone that way. But yeah, the last section, last crux of the route is called the Quartz Crack. It's this kind of leaning, steep chimney corner feature that you're looking at here. And what's kind of interesting is it's called the Quartz Crack. I don't think it's quartz. I think it's actually this like calcite material that's gone on this slab here. And it was amazing because you could not get your crampons to stick to it at all. They would just skate right off like it was glass. So you can see I'm kind of lie backing this thing, working my way up, and there's a fixed gear with a piece of tat there that's I'm really happy to clip the rope into in a few minutes. So actually I would say that this was hands down the most difficult pitch of the route. Something like 5.9, again, maybe M5. Yeah. And then I'm going to go back for a second. Once we get through this, we can actually traverse like right through here. So the key is to traverse left until you find some like moderate you know, they call them the exit cracks in Har's book, but like chimney system to exit. So this is the ledge we just traversed around on. And there's actually a little fixer up in there somewhere that was a good indicator that we were on track. So we pull around the corner, we see this, and it doesn't look bad, so why not? We fire up that. Some classic, you know, moderate mixed climbing here. This is probably like 5.6, so we're talking about like, you know, an M grade of like, you know, maybe M3, fairly moderate. I've seen this without the ice in it. It actually looks a bit harder, you know, to climb it without the ice. And actually, you know, going back to the rock, you can see it's so compact and shattered, you're unlikely to get gear in this stuff either. So it's nice to have a little ice to bury the tools in and know that the, you know, not having that much gear would be okay. Yeah, and at the top of that pitch, it was Matt's turn. He offered to take over. I think he started to get some summit fever here and took off. And we jokingly call this the 300-meter pitch because basically we summit climbed with the whole rope out for about an hour and a half to the summit ridge. And every once in a while he'd find a piece of gear or clip the rope to something. Finally hitting the summit snowfield. And at this point you're feeling it. You're like, wow, I can't believe it. We're out of the face now. So basically the difficulties are behind us. We just got to go up snow to the summit and find our way down. And you're starting to get really excited. Obviously some people had a different idea in mind and had to finally like, oh, I can stand here and go to the bathroom.
As we can see at the bottom of the picture, but I guess we'll forgive them after the effort they put in, like yourselves.
Exactly. Yeah, so top out, right over here somewhere, there was actually a substantial ledge that had been hacked out where people were bivvying. So at that point, we reorganized the rope, went back down to one of the half ropes between us, and kind of like had a drink and had something to eat. And I was like, wow, all right, let's do this. And finish it off. So here we are traversing the summit ridge. This is actually the top of the Middleegi Ridge. So anyone that thinks that this is like a really cool place, but doesn't want to climb the north face of the Eiger to get there, climb the Middleegi Ridge on the Eiger. It's a classic route. It's something akin to the Exum Ridge on the Grand Teton, or maybe the Hernley Ridge on the Matterhorn. Not super difficult, like 5.6, 5.7. And then you get to finish off by traversing this cool knife edge snow ridge. So highly recommend the experience in a more moderate setting as well. But for us, we were stoked to be standing up here, taking in the view of the Oberland, high peaks of the Oberland, the Finsteraarhorn, and some of the others here. This is a gigantic, this is actually part of the largest glacier system in the Alps. It joins at Concordia Platz to the Lech Glacier, and then runs out another like 10 or 15 miles into the plains. And what we have in front of us is just the last little bit of summit ridge here. This is also the Munch over here. And the Munch is also known as the monk, or that's the translation from the Swiss German as the monk. And for those of you that don't know, the Eiger is actually the ogre. So we're looking on the ogre, we're looking at the monk. And the monk's job is actually to guard the ogre guard the Jungfrau, which is behind here, from the ogre. So it kind of stands as a guard between the two mountains. It's a kind of cool story about the peaks here.
Nice.
Yeah, summit. Not a lot to say about
Very
this.
Nice.
I'm actually sponsored by camp, but that was this photo was before then, so pretty cool to have the camp helmet on. And actually when I started working with those guys, one of the first things Brett told me was that I had to ditch the helmet. Like, we get you a new helmet, please, Jeff. You got to stop wearing that old thing. You can even see I got it like duct taped so the plastic shell on the foam doesn't peel away. It's pretty funny.
Nice. Jeff, I'll stop you just for a second since we got a little bit longer. We are now at the full hour and a few people have to go. So I'll reiterate that the recording will be available tomorrow for everyone. So you can continue where we left off. We have a few more slides to finish the ascent and descent. We'll go into gear and preparation and the Q&A shortly. So bear with us. The story is, the Q&A is about to come very soon.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks everyone. For those that are cutting out or have already stepped out, sorry for maybe telling a few more stories than planned, but yeah, we're pretty much there. You guys have seen the summit now, so it's kind of over, right? Maybe we should just straight to Q&A. But yeah, actually, we do still have to get down. What's cool is that we have really nice conditions. This is the original route on the Eiger. It was first climbed, I think, in 1858. The names are slipping my mind right now, the guides that guided this the first time around. But basically, you know, actually, if you had skis right now, you'd be really stoked. You could probably ski this face. But basically, we got a steep snow face to walk down, a little bit of glacier, and then you can see the train station right there. That's our goal. And actually, we actually started from Kleine, which is right over here. But yeah, kind of cool. So down we go. Not that bad. Actually, what took us 45 hours to climb took us 3 hours to walk down. So it goes to show that just like traveling over moderate terrain is much easier. I can't remember. I don't think we actually used the rope. We kind of zigzagged around, you know, these occasional seracs in the glacier, kind of snaked through the rocks. Really, actually, you can see our tracks coming from over here. We probably snuck behind there. But really fine conditions, and we were pretty stoked to make a good time coming down. We had a standing ovation from the one Steinbach we met along the way of congratulations. Other than that, we were totally by ourselves. Showed back up in Kleine, spun around, took a look at the face we had just climbed, and I'm sure many people watching this this evening that are still with us have had the experience, like if you've climbed a mountain, to like look back at it when you're done, and it seems surreal. It doesn't connect. Like, wow, we were there? Huh, weird. Doesn't seem right. But anyway, it's a pretty cool feeling anytime you get it, and you just gotta scratch your head, take a photo, and go back and think about it again. So that's where we are now. And very conveniently, there was actually a little bar open in Kleine, so we grabbed a couple of beers and celebrated, ate some sandwiches.
Nice.
So I think the smiles say it all. Matt's a good buddy of mine. We've been climbing together since I think we first started climbing together in 1998. So it's been now 22 years. And even just a month ago, we were climbing together in the Chamonix area. So still hanging out and doing fun things together, getting challenged and scared in the mountains together. It's a good buddy. So I'll just say thanks now for tagging along. What I'd like to do for this next section is just really quickly go over the gear that we took with us, talk a little bit about preparation conditions. Actually, we talked about conditions, so I'll skip that. And then we'll get into some Q&A, some questions and answers. And so
and Jeff, not to worry, we have still more than 200 people on, so it's all good. And this is, I think, the perfect introduction to the Q&A, because we had a few questions about gear and how to prepare for climbs like this. So I think this is perfect. We'll answer a few with your next few slides, and then a few others that people asked will be answered after that.
Sounds great. Super. So there's the gear. That's all you need. Next slide. No, I'm just kidding. So backpack, 30 to 40 liter pack, go light, something. This is a cold world pack. It's actually kind of cool. It's got an insulate pad that acts as the back panel, so you can sleep on it if you wanted to. But as you can see, and as you saw from the photos, we carried pads up with us anyway, so it doesn't matter. Take an insulate pad. We got a backpack. In it, you can jam some things, but the ice tools, the crampons, and the winter climbing boots, you're pretty much going to be wearing them the whole time. So yeah, I recommend just a standard pair of like winter mountaineering boots, especially for the mixed conditions. If I was like in slightly warmer conditions, maybe I'd wear even a slightly lighter boot with like a pneumatic style crampon. But I was actually pretty happy to be in the monopoints and in rigid boots and warm boots, because we were there for a few days. We were definitely like trying to stay light. I took a 0 degrees Celsius, a 30-degree sleeping bag, and overnight temps are probably down around 25 degrees. So right in there, but not exactly what I would call comfortable, just warm enough to be comfortable. titanium pot, lightweight stove, you know, like a MSR pocket rocket. I got a simple marmot down jacket, a pair of black diamond winter climbing gloves. I probably had a lighter pair of gloves with me, but, you know, I usually carry like 2 pairs of gloves, maybe 3, you know, light pair, medium pair, heavy pair for if you get stranded and need to sit out the night. But we had sleeping bags, so that wasn't really an issue. Yep, the crampons, the ice tools, just a pair of, you know, modern ice tools, nothing fancy. I don't think I'd take no mix up on the face, you know, like something more for mixed climbing, but it depends. If it was colder, I probably would. I'd probably go to like a modular technical tool. So I was wearing like a pair of soft shell pants, light long underwear, a soft shell jacket, you know, fleece top, not a lot of, just a handful of layers. And I pretty much wore everything the whole time except for the down jacket. That would go in the pack. And then once we got to a belay, you might pull it out or at least wear it in the evening. And the trick with the down jacket is actually supplements with your sleeping bag. So you can pull it up over your feet for a couple extra degrees. That's a great tactic. Yeah, we talked about this stuff, headlamp, obviously, warm hat. And then finally, what everyone really wants to know is like, well, what was your rack like? And literally it's a 0.5 to number 3 Camelots, a small set of nuts, which we hardly ever used. It's hard to get nuts into limestone, admittedly. And then we probably had about a total of 8 draws and runners. And I think I would do that again. I'd probably take 8 or 9 of these. I might ditch the 3. I think we used it a few times. And nowadays I'd probably take 1 cam smaller. So I might take like the 0.3, the 0.4 to number 2. Hard to say, but and probably leave the nuts. The nice thing about the nuts is if you have to bail, then you don't feel so bad about leaving them behind. But honestly, there's not that much rack there. If you had to bail with that rack, it would be gone pretty fast. So any questions on that? Save for a moment, because we're going to...
Just to ask you, Jeff, we had a question from Santiago about like, how heavy is all of this? And you have to like climb it all of the time, so.
Yeah, you know, like if you look at all this gear, how much of this, and what you don't see is actually the food. So we had like 2 nights of like dried noodles to cook in the pot. We had, you know, a couple sandwiches, you know, probably 1 each for 2 days. So we probably had like 4 sandwiches, and then we probably had like, I don't know, 4 or 5 bars total each, maybe a few goos, and then a gas canister. So if you think about like the stove and the end slide pad and the sleeping bag and the puffy, that's in the pack, right? Along with the canister and the food and the water. And then everything else is on your body. So yeah, if you're a 180-pound climber like I am, you're probably weighing in at close to 200 pounds now with all your equipment on, plus, I don't know, the pack was probably 20, 25 pounds. So that should give you a little bit of an overview of, you know, what you're dealing with. Oh yeah, and lastly, leave the beers in the car. So another question I get asked a lot is like, how do you prepare for something like this? And, you know, on one side, you need to have the endurance to go all day for a couple days in a row. So, you know, think about marathon condition. Like, could you run a marathon? If you could, you probably have the endurance you'd need to be at this for a few days in a row. Do you need to run a marathon to climb the Eiger? No, but it probably paints a picture. Like if you can go hard for 4 to 8 hours in the mountains, like at a pretty aerobic pace, yeah, then you probably got the fitness that we're talking about. And then on the other side is to have the strength, the climbing ability to move through the terrain comfortably. And that's the other main part of what I would say, the training. Neither one of us actually trained specifically for this, but I actually was training for a marathon when we climbed the face. So it just happened to be in marathon condition. And it helped for sure to have that level of aerobic fitness. From a climbing perspective, I would say importantly is to be able to move over, you can read the bullet points, but you should be able to climb 5'8" in your boots, like no question about it. If you can't climb 5'8" in your boots, you're probably not at the technical level that you want to be at for the Eiger, because ultimately you're going to be climbing 5/8 in your boots pretty regularly. I think there's like 5 or 6 pitches that are that level. So there's one example. Brian down there, by the way. So
for people from Europe, maybe just reference, so 5/8 comes around like 5/8, 5B climbing.
Yeah, 5B French is 5/8.
Yeah.
At least in my little conversion chart stuck in my head. And also grade 5 is the UIA grade. So grade 5 is, you know, a classic 5/8 in the Alps. So 5/8, 5B French, or UIA 5. Or if for those of us joining us for the UK today, that would be a very severe. The other thing, you should be solid on ice. So as I say here, like, move well on water ice 4. You should be able to lead water ice 4, no big deal. You should be able to follow it quickly. It shouldn't rattle you, because if it does, then if you get on the ice hose in hard conditions, it'll be shaken, not stirred. And then finally, you should spend some time in the mountains, do big routes. There's another picture of Brian. For those of you that weren't here at the very beginning, Brian was involved in the chat a little bit, and he's both a client and a friend of mine. We've done a lot of stuff together, and Brian actually works for 57 Hours, so it's kind of a neat little tie-in. I actually introduced Brian to the owner of the co-founder of 57 Hours, and he ended up working for him after that. It's kind of funny, but
it is cool.
Yeah, it's totally cool. And so you can see here, Brian's doing probably a 5/6, 5/7 pitch. He's got his crampons on. This is on the Kufner Ridge of Mont Blanc, Mont Maudit, which we actually connected to Mont Blanc. And like, that's a perfect example. Like, you should be comfortable in this kind of terrain and those conditions. And that's the segue into doing something bigger and harder, like the Eiger. And in fact, Brian and I have talked about climbing the Eiger, and it's just a matter of finding the conditions and the timing to work out, and we should definitely get on it. So, time to move on. Questions and answers. Thanks again to everyone for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and stop the screen share so we can look at each other in the eyes. And sorry that ran over a little bit, but hopefully
I'll tell you, Jeff, that we got so many comments that people loved your presentation and images and everything. So I didn't really want to rush you, because the story was great and people enjoyed it. So thank you for doing this and taking the time to take the pictures. Like that was in 2010, when iPhones were not going left and right, you know, so you really had to take an extra effort for the photos. Thank you for sharing the story and preparing this, and thank you everyone for joining. So we finished with the presentation part. I think we already answered a lot of the questions, but let's continue answering what people left. And one thing that some people asked about, if you guide this climb or Chamonix area. So maybe we can start with that. You know, for those of you who maybe joined later and maybe don't know, Jeff is a IFMGA mountain guide living in Chamonix, I think for 2 years now. So can you tell us a little bit about doing this as a guided climb? Did you even do it with a client, and are you open to do it? So tell us a little bit how that works.
You know, that's a great question. And honestly, like, I think every person is different. You know, we're all kind of the same. We all want the same things, but we also are different as individuals. And so as a guide, I wouldn't say that I would just, like, you know, Perry, to, if you're like, hey, Jeff, I want to hire you to do this this winter, I'd be like, well, great, let's go climbing together. Like, I want to see who you are and how you move over this kind of terrain. And honestly, like, I wouldn't go out there with someone without doing a progression with them and actually getting to know them well, because on a climb like that, you really need to trust your partner. And it's really more at this point about having a partnership, in my mind, than it is strictly guiding it. There's a lot of terrain there that's really hard to ensure safety on. And so from my side, I would say, yeah, it's possible that I might guide this, but it would be with someone that I'd actually kind of developed a pretty strong relationship with over time. And I'd really want to, you know, if possible, tackle it like a partnership. So we're each carrying, you know, having tasks, sharing the load carrying, perhaps taking turns on the easier pitches, if the person was up for that, so forth. So So I'd say yes, but throw a conditional at that. And on the other side, there are people that are, like I have some guide colleagues that are quite bold and, you know, routinely climb this terrain a lot. And, you know, they probably would tackle it more, you know, more aggressively, I would say. So everyone's different in that regard.
But I can also add to people interested in the guided ascent in Eiger that Jeff and Brian, who did the Chamonix webinar together, are doing like this as a build-up. So you do like bigger and bigger and bigger goals. So I guess the Eiger would be one of the big ones that you have to lead up to. That's basically what you're telling us. So you lead up from bigger and bigger goals. So this is great, but we also, so this is how it works for people who are looking strictly at the Eiger North Face. We also have a question from Greg, who is asking about guiding other maybe easier routes on the Eiger. Are you doing that? Have you done it before?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I've climbed the Middle Leggy Ridge of the Eiger a few times. I was talking about that as we got on the summit ridge. And that actually is, it's a lot like climbing the Hernley Ridge on the Matterhorn. Maybe a little more committing, but not quite as big. Takes about the same amount of time. And absolutely, like, you know, that's probably my bread and butter of my summer work here in Chamonix. In fact, I was actually on the Matterhorn yesterday. That's why I got the sunburn today. You know, I didn't put sunscreen on the first day, the second time that I should have on the summit. Remember to always, before you turn around off the summit, put another layer of sunscreen on. So I got a little beaten up on the glacier. But yeah, you know, like, what I do for a living is just taking people in the alpine. Cosmiques Ridge of Chamonix and on the Guide du Midi is like a classic introduction to climbing rock in your boots or with crampons on. We have a plethora of really interesting routes in the Chamonix area for learning those techniques and learning to climb rock in your boots, getting some mileage. There's a couple other routes on the Eiger that are fairly moderate. There's the original route. You can go up the West Face. It's more of a snow climb. Or you can do the South Ridge from the Muncho-Kutta. That's another popular one. Plus other peaks. Anyway, I could go on for a while. So feel free to get in touch with me, actually. Those of you that have specific questions, look me up. I'm not that hard to find. Maybe I'll punch my email in the chat real quick.
I will actually jump in here. So everyone who registered to the webinar will get the link to the recording. And we will also share your email from High Peak Adventures, which is your guiding service you operate through. So you will get direct contacts of Jeff and you'll be able to ask more questions in details. We also have a question on top of that from Ash about, I mean, do you do guided trips in Chamonix, which you basically answered? Like, yes, that's what Jeff does for a living. So feel free, Ash, to reach out to Jeff and arrange a climb. This summer is maybe a bit more difficult to come to Chamonix. But if you're there, you'll probably enjoy a lot less people than usual. So, and if you
step in for a second, if you don't mind,
yes.
Say, you know, more often than not, I'm booked out. Like I was actually booked out for the summer last winter by about Christmas time. But because of COVID and the fact that I actually have a lot of American clients, none of them have been able to come to France. So I'm actually have some time this summer. So if someone's interested and wants to do something interesting in the mountains, please do get in touch because I have some free time this summer. Likely booked next summer, but you know, all I can say is get in touch and let's find a way to get you out on the climb that you're interested in. Nice.
And maybe we can, and if you look for inspiration about the routes you can do in Chamonix, go back to the 50 Cent Alps webinar page and get yourself a recording of the Chamonix webinar, where Jeff and Brian went through the like classics from, I think we started at like very easy terrain with like 5.5 or even less, and then build up to the bigger goals. So I'm sure you'll find a route that inspires you and hook up with Jeff and go do it. I think that's the thing that that's why we do what we do at 57 hours, and we want to inspire you to go out on an adventure. And I think we could go on and on about this, but I think we have a few more questions we can answer, not to go too long. So we actually had a question from the start from Arnaud. He's asking if the route looks bolted, and the question was, is it bolted? And we obviously heard from the presentation that there is not really. But maybe a good question is, are there any bolts, and how much old gear is inside, and do you trust this old gear? So maybe these three questions you can answer at once.
And you're talking about this route in specific,
Yes, this route specifically, yes.
Yeah, I just got distracted by someone asking about a presentation on the Cassine Ridge. Maybe that's the next one, David. So yeah, on the Eiger, honestly, like we ran into so few bolts. I think there was one at the top of the difficult crack to belay from. There was, I can't remember any on the ramp. And remember, this is 10 years ago. So, you know, maybe things have changed. But there was a couple bolts at the Traverse of the Gods bivouac spot. So we actually clipped in a bolted anchor for that. Yeah, not a lot. I was actually pretty surprised. I expected to find more fixed gear in the route. And really there's some pitons here and there, and they weren't all great. You know, so it really came down to just being comfortable with the terrain and like, you know, having good belays. I think that was a big part of it.
Cool, thanks for sharing that. We go on to the next one from Karen. She's asking about reading the route. So is it like, when are you visualizing the route from the town, like when you're on it or inspecting the terrain? So, and in general, how difficult it was to read this route and advance?
Yeah, to find the way, it was, admittedly, in the conditions we had it, with some traffic ahead of us, there was some traces, you know, some tracks in the snow to follow. So anytime that the terrain was quite easy, we actually had some tracks to follow. But I would say, like, it's actually pretty intuitive, and I wouldn't recommend anyone to go out on the face without doing some homework first. If you haven't read Har's book, you probably, I mean, this is going to sound, I don't want to sound too harsh, but like, once you read Har's book, then you're going to want to climb the face. You know, like people know about it, but you should really read the history of the face, and that's going to be really enticing for you. And then once you read the story about the first ascent and some subsequent ascents, you'll really start to get to know the route in your mind, even before you look at the face. And you'll be tracing the photographs as well, and that explains a lot. And frankly, like, it's funny because there's only like 5 or 6 crux pitches. There's a lot of moderate terrain on the route. So what you're doing is really piecing together like these key, almost like keyholes, you know, like you're trying to find this one spot of the mountain, find the right piece to put in there, get through it, and then you get some easier terrain and you find another one. And hopefully that makes sense. It might not be the best analogy, but I would say that it was actually pretty straightforward, although Matt did want to make a left turn once when we were supposed to go right. And I was like, dude, the route's over there, yo. It's pretty fun. That takes us off the face. That's the way. But you know, like, it's one of those things.
Yeah,
you want a good note. That.
Yeah, you want to do your homework, as you said. And this also leads me to a question from John. He's asking if how does Eiger limestone quality compare to other places, like maybe in the Alps, and even he's asking specifically about the Canadian Rockies. So maybe you can just tell us a bit what to expect. What can you compare it with?
You know, I've climbed a little bit in the Canadian Rockies, mostly ice, so I didn't have to deal with the rock, but I think that would be a pretty good analogy. So if you know what the Canadian Rockies are like, you probably already have an idea of what the rock on the Eiger is like. Anytime you get into alpine limestone, so I'm going to qualify that with the word alpine because, you know, the stuff we find in tropical and subtropical climates is actually quite fine. It's wonderful rock. The warmer the climate is, the better limestone is. But as it gets shoved up into the mountains, you know, by a big uplift event, and then has freeze thaw action working on it every year for thousands of years, or tens of thousands of years, or hundreds of thousands of years, the stuff gets pretty broken. And you could see that by those photographs. So the rock quality, yeah, alpine limestone, and kind of like the Canadian Rockies. And, you know, I will say, like, I remember thinking about this after the climb, and I was like, wow, you know, actually it climbed really well, but it's because we climbed it with ice tools and crampons. You know, if you're climbing it with your bare hands and actually trying to get enough rock gear into it, you might not be so happy. but with the conditions we had, I would say it was actually really quite good. So it's just perspective, I guess. It's not granite.
That's for sure. That's for sure. We have then a question from Sofyan. I would guess that he's probably from the States or somewhere. Is that, do you need a permit to climb this? And if you climb without a guide, can you just come and climb, or how does that work?
Yeah, it's for those I'm just going to guess that he's coming from US or Canada, because there are certainly permits attached to it. Well, even the Himalaya in Africa, you have to have a permit to climb a mountain. But one of the beautiful things about the Alps is, in fact, there are no rules. There's a few rules in Switzerland about where you're allowed to bivouac or not, but there's no permit system. There's no like registration system whatsoever to get on any of the mountains in the Alps. On the other side, if you take a guide, you are the only guides that are allowed by law to guide in the Alps in alpine terrain are IFMGA guides. So they're the ones with the full certification, and both they're professional ski guides, alpine guides, and rock guides. And without that, you basically, if you're paying someone money, you're actually doing an illegal transaction, and they're illegally working in the environment. But yeah, you can go out and just jump right on it, no problem. It's just their way to.
If you're ready, of course. And then we have a bit more of questions about doing this. Like, let's say that you're traveling from abroad, and if you're well prepared, like to the conditions you mentioned, like climbing 5'8" in boots, sure, comfortable on ice. We have Jacek Wojtowicz, I would guess somewhere from like Poland, Czech Republic, is asking, how much time do you think is needed for like Nord 1, including acclimatization and maybe margin for weather? Is 1 week enough, or?
That's probably one of the best questions we'll hear. And I think anyone that's dreamed about climbing this face and seriously considered what it would take to do it knows that, in fact, it's quite hard to find the conditions you're looking for. Doesn't always happen. You're probably more likely to find them February, March these days than you would in October. In fact, during confinement, we were in confinement in France for 10 weeks between the middle of March and the end of May. And we actually had 3 weeks of perfect weather that, you easily could have climbed the Eiger. And in fact, Jeff and Pretty, if they're still with us, I don't know. If they are, they should pop up on the group chat for a second and let us know. But they climbed it in the, right as confinement started. They ran out of France and went over to Switzerland and climbed the North Face. I think they did it in 3 or 4 days. And yeah, so the conditions were there. The weather was good enough that they did it. And during confinement, we had 3 brilliant weeks where you could have, people would have been doing laps on it if they're allowed to. So yeah, you might find it in the springtime now. I definitely wouldn't even think about summer, like anytime between like June and probably the end of September. It's probably not going to happen. Too dangerous with the rockfall. And then midwinter, yeah, possible. The days are short, so you definitely want to be efficient. But that was one nice thing, like about October, and on the other side, like end of February or into March, like the days are getting longer, so you actually can get through the face in a couple days.
Nice. Thanks for answering this. We are nearing the 1.5 hour mark on our webinar, so maybe we are close to conclude. I'll have a few more very short questions for you. Note to people who left the question in the Google form, we will pass these questions to Jeff, and he will answer it in the next few days, depending on his schedule. So worry not if you didn't get your answer, you will. Everyone else who asked in the chat, I think we covered almost everything. I will ask you from David that interrupted you. He asked about the Cassin Ridge, and he asked if you can do a presentation. So before you answer, I will say that 57 hours is taking a break from webinars in August when everybody's like on vacations and all that stuff, but we're coming back strong in September and going forward. So we'll do a lot more of these webinars in the fall. So we'll certainly consider the Cassin Ridge and other legendary routes or peaks in the Alps as well. I think it's great topics to do. So Jeff, maybe shortly, did you do it? And do you have cool photos like from the Eiger?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, the Casino Ridge actually is one of the other, I've probably done a handful. I mean, I've done a lot of routes around the world and have a lot of great memories. In fact, we could do a talk on Everest sometime if people are interested in that. I'm sure a lot of people would get involved because there's some curiosity there. But I would say yeah, the Casino Ridge, the Eiger, climbing Fitzroy in Patagonia, were definitely some of the most memorable climbs that I've done. Coincidentally, those 3 climbs were with the same partner. So it says a lot about the partnership too.
For sure. So I think it might be a cool topic on one of our webinars, Everest as well. So I think all of these topics are great. And be sure to follow 50 Cent Alps webinars. We'll have a lot more coming. And I will end, we have 2 more questions. I will end with this. So first, from B. Ramones, that's a nice nickname. What's your next big project, Jeff?
Next big project. I get that question all the time. Oh man. Well, if I could just get Brian out here, we could go do the Walker Spur this weekend. But yeah, I've been watching the Walker Spur. So the North Face of the Grand Jurass, another one of the big faces in the Alps. That's a summertime climb. I'd like to tick off the rest of the North Faces, the famous North Faces of the Alps. Be great to get back to the Dolomites and do some of the long rock routes there, like the South Face and the Marmoladas, 3,000 foot, 1,000 meter tall face with a great route on it. Stuff like that. Really, now that I'm living in Chamonix, I'm thinking about the Alps. There's a couple things I've been thinking about around the world, maybe Shivling in India, big Himalayan peak, traverse of Mount Kenya. I don't know. There's some things out there. But right now, actually, the biggest project is probably that kid that I had in my arms at the beginning of the show. So putting a lot of energy towards our new son, Everett. And yeah, I guess that's the real big project. Nice. Raising the guy and hopefully showing him a way to enjoy this world and just live life in a nice, peaceful, harmonious way with everyone else.
Perfect. I think this is a perfect perfect answer to this question, I would say. And I think I would maybe want to end with the question from Yogi. He is asking, where is the line where you the challenge ends and maybe too much risk start? So how do you manage this? Where do you draw the line? And is this line changing over time? I would say with Everett, the risk line is probably going low.
Totally. I saw that question on the chat, and it's probably one of the better questions, along with how do you get good conditions on the north of the Eiger? And going back to that one, it's certainly the case that what we did is we I was in the Alps for 2 weeks, or I was in Europe for 2 weeks, and we just had the idea in our minds, and we were I brought the equipment along and we were ready for it. And so from that perspective, if you want to climb the Eiger, you really got to just be open to the opportunities and bring your stuff with you and always keep your finger on the pulse. Going to your question, how do you acknowledge or even quantify the line between risk? What was it? Risk and
so it's more where is the exact question is, what separates challenge and the risk that might kill you? Exactly. Where is
so thinking about something where I want to go challenge myself, and then quantifying is the risk level of this objective too high? So what I do for a living as a guide, in a nutshell, besides going climbing and moving over terrain, is I'm constantly trying to weigh the balance between risk and reward, if you will. And part of risk is oh shoot, I forgot about this. It's exposure versus consequence. So like putting yourself in front of the hazard and then figuring out what the consequence of the hazard is. So it's like likelihood of something happening and what happens if it does happen, right? It's kind of what I do for a living. So I'm always like in my mind trying to measure what the chances of something bad happening are, and then what the bad thing would be. Does that make sense? So like you take a 10-foot fall, and so what's the, what are the chances of me falling off and that happening? And then what's going to happen if I do take that fall? If you don't have any gear in and you're simul climbing with your partner and you pitch off and you pull both of you off, the consequences is tremendous. It's not just you, it's your partner and you're falling down the face. And so that's kind of, to me, an unacceptable risk, really. And so the likelihood of you falling better be 0. So you saw us moving together up the ice field. We're moving up 45-degree perfect neve, maybe 50 degrees, but literally I would ski that slope. So I'm not going to fall off of it in my monopoint crampons and 2 tools sunk in there. It just won't happen. And so we were willing to accept that risk, but the moment we got into harder terrain, we started getting some gear in. And if we couldn't get the gear, then we're belaying each other for sure. So at least if someone falls, the other person doesn't come off with them. Ideally, we're trying to minimize the fall where you get hurt and not dead. But yeah, it's a tough one. It's one of these, enduring questions that I have for myself. And when I'm out with my guests, obviously, we don't even go near that point where, like, really, I guess moving together on the Matterhorn, there's some places where if someone pitched off, we hope that the other person would hold on. But, if we can't control that situation, then we need a belay. That's all I can say. Sorry, complex question.
No, I think, Jeff, your answer is perfect. And I will add my 2 cents, just saying that I'm a rock climber of, like, I think 17 years now. And only in the last few years, I actually went out with a guide a few times. I was like a sport climber, just doing my thing. It's not really super risky. But then going to, I don't know, Yosemite or maybe doing some bigger stuff, in hiring a guide, and this is, by the way, a bit of commercial for you, but what I learned in hiring a guide is that you will have your learning curve go it will be a lot steeper. You will learn a lot more. But the second thing that's super important is that a guide will use his immense experience in going, as you said, over like various different terrains, and use that to keep you safe in environments where you maybe won't recognize the risk yourself because you have a bit of less experience. So this is, for me, what I think it's the best, for me, 2 best things about hiring a guide is that you will learn a lot more and you will be safe a lot more than you would be on your own. At least if you have like years of experience, of course, it's a different story, but then you're almost a pro. If you're like a normal, regular guy, it certainly can enhance you. And of course, the third element of hiring a guide is certainly you often become friends with those guys. They are like crazy, like slightly crazy, but actually super cool people that, again, keep you safe, and you learn so much from them. So, Jeff, I'm actually looking forward to doing a climb with you in Chamonix in a few weeks.
Likewise. Hopefully sooner, quite soon.
Yes, so in a few weeks, I hope the COVID situation doesn't get worse. So folks, we have been here for 1 hour 40. I think it's time.
Yeah, I think your screen just locked. So in fact, it is. Or is everyone, somebody give me a thumbs up if you can hear me, but not Peritza. Yeah, that's funny. Well, Peritza screen just locked, so clearly the presentation's supposed to be over. I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining this. It's super cool. It's a pleasure to present this to you. One of my favorite climbs of all time. Like, I get this question a lot, like, what was your favorite climb, or what's your favorite mountain? I don't actually give the Eiger as the answer as my favorite mountain, mostly because I was a guide in the Tetons and probably did about 200 trips on the Grand Teton, including like a half a dozen, actually probably 10 or so different routes. And that really is my favorite mountain. But the Eiger North Face, in the conditions that we had with that partnership, was actually one of my most memorable climbs and something I look back at with great affection, and hopefully get to go do something like that again soon. So thanks everybody. Have a great day, or if you're here in Europe, have a good evening. Time to open a beer.